From oppressed son to free man. The story of someone who rewrote himself and how I transformed pain into reconstruction. I never imagined I'd reach a point in my life where I'd feel ashamed to look in the mirror, not because of my appearance, but because of the way I was letting myself be treated. I've always been that guy who said, family is everything. And in a way I still believe that. But my story has shown me that family can also be a burden that weighs you down. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Marlon, I'm 34 years old, and I live on the outskirts of a big city. I grew up without luxury, but with the idea that if I worked hard, if I was honest, and didn't turn my back on my family, I would receive respect and affection in return. But the truth is, love doesn't always return in the same way we give it. I supported my entire household, paid my mother's bills, helped my siblings with their children, and still had to hear jokes that I wasn't ambitious because I didn't buy a new car, didn't travel, or invest in anything that was just for myself. I didn't realize it, but I was being sucked in little by little, as if my life were just a 24-hour bank to solve everyone's problems. The turning point began in a way I never expected. It was one random afternoon, tired after work. I worked at a mechanic's shop, coming home smelling of grease with cut hands and a sore shoulder, but I still had to smile at my nephews and listen to my mother's nagging about the electricity bill or the repair of my sister's washing machine. That day, I decided to pass by instead of going home. I walked into a tattoo parlor near the shop. It was a place that always caught my attention because of the colors, the designs on the wall, the music playing. Inside, it felt like another world, a world that had nothing to do with the dull life I led. That's where I met Monica. She was behind the counter, laughing loudly at something a customer had said. I remember feeling out of place with my grease-stained clothes, but at the same time, I didn't want to leave. I wanted to hear that laughter again. Monica was unlike anything I knew, an independent woman, owner of her own business, covered in tattoos whose meaning I couldn't even fathom, but which told stories in their lines. We talked as if we'd known each other forever, and for the first time in years, I felt someone saw me. Not the provider, not the brother who helps everyone, not the son who can't fail, but me, Marlon. That was shocking because it had been so long since I'd recognized myself that it felt strange. In the following days, I made excuses to stop by the studio until I stopped making excuses and admitted I wanted to see her. We started hanging out, at first secretly because I already knew it wouldn't work out at home. Monica was nothing like my family's standards. Liberal, outspoken, covered in tattoos, financially independent. I could already anticipate the criticism before I even told her, and it didn't take long for it to happen. When my mother and brothers found out about Monica, it felt like I'd committed a crime. They talked as if I were distancing myself from my people, just because I was meeting someone who had a different life. My mother looked me in the eye and told me that woman was going to take me away from them, as if I were property. My brothers started mocking me, saying I was trying to play rich because I was dating a middle-class woman. The jokes turned to accusations, and the accusations turned to fights. I tried to explain that what I felt was real, that Monica was good for me, but it seemed the more I talked, the more I was treated like a traitor. Inside, I felt a mixture of anger and guilt, as if loving someone was wrong. I remember one night in particular, I was sitting on the couch in my mother's living room after yet another fight. I'd had a few beers to try to ease the weight on my chest, but nothing seemed to be working. My mother was crying, saying I didn't care about her anymore, that I only thought about the tattooed woman. My brothers looked at me with that look of contempt, as if I'd abandoned them all. And I sat there motionless, feeling my stomach churn, my throat burn. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. It was at that moment that I realized I was losing not only my family, but also myself. I wondered, how long would I endure carrying everyone on my back and still be treated like the villain of the story? After that night, I couldn't sleep well for days. I'd lie down, close my eyes, and it felt like all the voices of my family were coming to me at once. You've changed. That woman is going to destroy you. No one can count on you anymore. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing in a cold sweat as if I'd run a marathon. The worst part was, I half believed it. Was I really abandoning my family? Was I being selfish for wanting something just for myself? These questions tortured me. When I went to work, my colleagues noticed I was quieter, but I'd make excuses saying I was tired. Deep down, I was afraid to admit that I no longer knew who I was without the demands of my family. Monica noticed. She didn't pressure me, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Sometimes, when we were lying down, she'd run her hand over my chest and say softly, "You need to choose yourself, Marlon." These words echoed strangely within me. I wasn't used to thinking about myself. It was always someone else's problem to solve, someone else's bill to pay, someone else's repairs to do. And then suddenly, someone would come along and tell me I needed to choose myself. It felt wrong and liberating at the same time. I wanted to believe it, but the weight of guilt was so great that sometimes I considered breaking up with her just to have peace at home. I almost did it twice. What held me together was remembering how I felt when I was with her. With Monica, I laughed at silly things, tried foods I'd never tried before, and went to places I'd previously thought weren't for me. I began to see that there was life outside my family bubble. But of course, this also increased conflicts. One Sunday, I took Monica to lunch at my mother's house, thinking that with time, things would improve. It was a disaster. My mother barely spoke to her. My brothers made mean jokes, and at the end of lunch, my mother even blurted out, "You don't need this, son. This woman isn't for you." I saw Monica's face harden, and in that moment, I felt like I was in the middle of a war I'd never asked to fight. After that day, I slowly began to withdraw. It wasn't planned. It was instinct. I started spending more time at Monica's studio, helping with things, doing small repairs, staying up late chatting with her and her friends. It was a different world, but I felt at ease there. But at home, the atmosphere only worsened. My mother began treating me coldly, as if I were a stranger. My brothers stopped asking me to my face, but they were constantly needling me. My body ached from the accumulated tension. Heavy shoulders, a constant headache, and a desire to disappear that frightened me. It was at this point that I seriously considered dropping everything, running away, leaving behind family, work, everything. But I didn't run away. One night I was sitting on the bedroom floor, propped up against the bed, completely exhausted. I didn't even have the strength to cry. I grabbed my phone, opened my notepad, and started writing random things just to try to get my head together. In the middle of it all, I wrote a sentence that changed everything. I also deserve to exist. It sounds simple, but in that moment, it was like a shock. I realized I'd been living my entire life as a resource for others, and not as a human being with desires, dreams, fears, and limits. That's when I decided I was going to change. I didn't know exactly how, nor did I have a clear plan, but I knew that if I didn't start putting myself first, I would die silently, without ever having truly been myself. After that night I wrote, "I deserve to exist too." I started to look at my routine differently. It wasn't like a button flipped and everything changed, but it was the beginning. The next day, when I woke up to go to work, I felt different. I still felt the weight, still felt the guilt, but there was also a small flame inside me. I started to think, what do I want? What is only mine? It was strange because I had never stopped to ask myself that kind of question. All I thought about was how to pay the next bill or solve someone's next problem. This question began to follow me in everything. While fixing a car engine in the shop, I would catch myself looking at my own calloused hands and wondering if this was what I wanted for the rest of my life. The answer didn't come quickly, but it came in bits and pieces. I realized I enjoyed being in Monica's studio because there I felt useful in a different way. It wasn't an obligation, it wasn't a demand, it was a contribution. When I helped change a light bulb, assemble a piece of furniture, or even organize simple things, I received a sincere thank you. It made me feel alive, and it was in this process that I began to see that I could indeed have another life. Not that I was going to abandon the studio overnight, but I understood that I needed to balance things. I could no longer be just the breadwinner who supported everyone. I needed to build something of my own, even if it was small. But of course, none of this happened without resistance. When my family realized I was pulling away, the drama escalated. My mother started calling every day, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming, always accusing me of leaving her alone. One time I hung up the phone and shook for almost half an hour. My body reacted as if I'd been punched. I felt suffocated, with a lump in my throat, like I wanted to rip my own skin off to escape that weight. I confess I thought about giving up on the move several times, because dealing with that kind of guilt was unbearable. But at the same time, I remembered Monica, remembered how I felt when I was with her, and that pulled me back. It was during this period that Monica gave me a blank notebook. She said, "Write here everything you feel, everything you want, even if it's just one word a day." I thought it was silly at first, but I accepted. And this notebook became a weapon against the chaos. I began to write everything down, my anger, my guilt, my fears, even the small victories, like being able to say no when a brother asked me for money. Writing gave me clarity. I read it later and realized how trapped I was in a cycle. Every time I said yes to them and no to myself, I erased myself further. The notebook became a witness to my reconstruction, page by page. One of the hardest moments of this period was when I had to look at my mother and tell her I wasn't going to pay all the household bills anymore. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I broke out in a cold sweat. My hands were shaking, and with every word I said, I felt her pulling away from me. She cried, called me ungrateful, and said I was killing her with sadness. It was devastating. I left feeling like the worst human being in the world. But when I got to Monica's house, sat on the couch, and took a deep breath, I felt relief for the first time in years. It hurt, but it was necessary. It was the first major cut of the cord that held me captive. Over time, I began to grow stronger. It wasn't overnight, but each small decision I made me feel more whole. I started planning things for myself, small savings, courses I wanted to take, even thinking about investing in something unrelated to family. Monica constantly encouraged me, but without pressure. She knew I needed to move at my own pace. This feeling of building something of my own gave me the courage to face the challenges that still lay ahead. I felt like I was finally becoming the protagonist of my own story, not just a supporting character in the narrative of someone else's life. Of course, it wasn't easy. There were still days when I felt guilt, regret, and fear. One day, my mother showed up at the studio, unannounced, looking at me with that mixture of sadness and accusation. I felt my chest tighten, my throat burn, and I almost fell to the floor in despair. But this time, I took a deep breath, remembered the notebook, what I'd written, the small victories, and I could hear myself saying, I deserve to live my life. I welcomed my mother with respect, but set clear boundaries. She remained silent, surprised, and although the tension lingered, something inside me shifted. I could no longer be held hostage by the fear of disappointing anyone. Another important step was rebuilding my self-esteem. I spent years believing my worth, lay in what I gave, what I resolved, what I sustained. Monica helped me see that my worth also lies in what I feel, what I choose, and what I achieve for myself. I started taking better care of myself, not in a vain way, but in a real way. Exercising, eating, even small things like fixing my hair, buying clothes I liked. They were small gestures, but they reminded me that I existed for myself, not just for others. This physical and emotional rebuilding went hand in hand, and I felt my body and mind aligning, as if I could finally breathe without chest pain. In the midst of it all, I stumbled several times. Occasionally, I gave in to family pressure, helped more than I should have, felt guilty later, and blamed myself even more. But I realized this was part of the process. I didn't need to be perfect, I just needed to keep trying. I learned to laugh at myself, to acknowledge my mistakes without punishing myself. This learning process was transformative. With Monica by my side, I felt there was room for mistakes and growth, and that was liberating. For the first time in my life, I had someone who believed in me without demanding that I be someone else, and this completely changed my concept of love and partnership. Today, when I look back, I see how much I struggled and how much I still deal with parts of the pain. My relationship with my family remains complicated, and it will probably never be perfect. But now I can stand up for myself without feeling extreme guilt. I can love my mother and my brothers, but without erasing myself. I can be with Monica, building something of our own without feeling like a traitor. Every step, every decision, every tear was worth it. I learned that loving yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And that, even amidst pain and family pressure, there is a path to regaining your life and your identity. What surprised me most about this process was realizing that overcoming obstacles isn't a destination, but a continuous journey. There are still days when I wake up with a heavy chest. Memories of the pressure and contempt haunt me, and I still feel that urge to disappear. But now I know how to deal with it. I go back to my notebook, write, talk to Monica, take a deep breath, and move forward. I've learned that there's no shame in feeling weak sometimes. The shame is letting yourself be paralyzed by it. Every difficulty I face today strengthens me, because I've learned to choose myself first, without ceasing to love others, but without losing myself in the process. Something that completely changed my perspective was realizing the importance of creating healthy boundaries. I learned to say no without fear, to assert my choices, to explain without apologizing. At first, I felt like I was going to hurt everyone, but I realized that by protecting myself, I was also protecting my emotional health. This allowed me to have truer, more honest relationships without constant guilt. I learned that we don't have to accept being treated as objects of emotional or financial exploitation to be loyal. True loyalty includes respecting ourselves, and I finally understood that. Today, looking back on my story, I see that every tear, every sleepless night, every feeling of suffocation has brought me here. I built a life with Monica based on respect, freedom, and true, unvarnished love. I still make mistakes, I still feel fear, I still struggle with the guilt my family imposed on me, but now I have the tools and the awareness to carry on. And as painful as it was, I know it was all worth it. I rediscovered myself, I reclaimed myself, and I learned that it's possible to bounce back, even when it seems the whole world is against you. If I could give advice to someone going through a similar situation, I would say, don't negate yourself. Don't wait for anyone to validate your suffering to begin saving yourself. Start with yourself. Write, breathe, set boundaries, seek true support, even if it's from people you meet by chance. Overcoming isn't instantaneous, but every step matters. And it's surprising to realize that the more you choose yourself, the more you find the strength to deal with others and the conflicts that life imposes. I've learned that pain isn't eternal, but what you do with it can be transformative. Today I am truly Marlon, a man who still loves his family, but who has learned to love himself, who still feels fear, but has learned to act despite it, who still remembers the pain, but knows there is a path to regaining his life, who still feels anger, but has learned to transform anger into learning. And above all, I learned that it is possible to live a full and happy life, even when facing rejection, pressure and exploitation from those I love most. I chose myself, and I continue to choose myself every day. This is my victory, small and great at the same time.